Well, hello, guys, and welcome to a little bit on populism here. Not really a whole bunch. Um, there's four slides, but it's not exactly filled with all sorts of information, as you will see. But populism, sounds like populace, the people, and it really, if you keep that in mind, that's probably a pretty good way to think about, what populism is in terms of the policies, and it just really is a way to look out for the average person, the regular member of the population. Not the, as we can see down here, a term called moneyed interests. And so it was grassroots political movement. Remember, grassroots means that it is originated by the people themselves. It wasn't sponsored by a big company or a political organization or anything like that. It just sort of rose among the people, particularly, small farmers. And certainly they were fighting against big corporations. We mentioned the money interest, railroads, big corporations, etc. Uh, the movement was very, very effective for a very short time. Now, people will say, "Oh, come on, it was longer than that," and you certainly could make the argument that some of the um, I guess legacies of populism certainly have lasted into today, but I guess the the brightest part of the movement was between 1889 and 1896, and then of course it slowly faded out. Well, it started, you could say, at least the origins of it, even way back as early as the 1870s. And as we had mentioned before, the railroad certainly was able to abuse its power, charging farmers ridiculous rates in some cases to ship their products across, across the country. And so it started with the demand for lower railroad rates. Again, the railroad, these are the big corporations who the populists felt are using their 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 power unfairly. They're using it to intentionally hurt the smaller businesses, the smaller people like the farmers. The other very interesting thing is that the populists argued that business and the wealthy, not land, should bear the burden of taxation. And when they say, well, what do you mean by not land? This means not the farmers. So you're saying we're going to tax the land because you produce, whatever wheat or corn or whatever it is from the land, or because you own a large farm on so many acres, we're going to tax that. The populism says no. Populists say no, that shouldn't be what it is. It should be the business and the wealthy. That's where the most of the tax burden should lie. Now, populism, of course, farmers, and again, say right now we probably don't know too many people who are farmers, but at the time, farming was a very popular occupation and really was a huge part of the economy. And so, populists were especially concerned about what we call the high cost of money. Now, yesterday, or was it last night? We're talking about, well, what do you mean the cost of money? And if we're talking about the bimetallic standard versus the gold standard, and just remembering that with the gold standard, there was less money around, but it was worth more, as opposed to the bimetallic standard, where there'd be more money around, but it was worth less. And so the reason why that's important is because farmers needed capital or money. Capital equals money to purchase agricultural equipment and land. They need credit to buy supplies, store their crops in grain elevators, warehouses. I mean, these things are expensive. And at the time, loans to supplies for supplies in order to raise these crops range from 40 to 345% a year, which is just ridiculous. And the reason why it was so high is because there was a shortage of money. There wasn't enough money in the system, according to the populists. The bankers and the big business said, "Hey, there's plenty of money. It's no problem at all." Excuse me. So the populists said, "These rates, no one can probably possibly afford this." And by the way, when you're looking at, let's say, a rate, even for, let's say, a car loan or something like that, maybe you'd pay 5%, 7%. I mean, somewhere roughly in that vicinity. 40% is, there's no loan, no legitimate loan would ever be even remotely close to 40%. And so that is just ridiculously high. And so, anyways, the populists said, okay, well, why is there not more money in circulation in the United States? There should be a lot more money. Um, and that was a big, big thing. Why isn't there more money? And why, again, do the bigger, uh, like the New York bankers, again, these big companies, why are they controlling the nation's money supply? And so, after nearly 2 decades of falling crop prices, and also the typical unresponsiveness of the government saying, "Oh yeah, 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 we'll take care of it." In both political parties, it wasn't like the Democrats or the Republicans were doing anything. The farmers just rebelled and said, "You know what? Forget this. Neither side is going to help us. We need to start our own party," and that's why we say, it started in 1891. Um, I mean, I guess that's technically when it started, but obviously, as you can see, it was beginning before then. Well, populists attack wealth, and it did range from some sort of organized, calm sort of rhetoric, calling on people to seize wealth, but. Most of it was not go out there and destroy people and attack them physically. It was more, let's take over the reins of government and use that way to tame the power of the wealthy. So it was not this sort of, we should go out and kill them and destroy them. It was, no, let's do this in a legal, responsible manner. Um, Again, the populists, they were very, very big supporters of farmers and laborers. And they said they're the true producers of the wealth. And by the way, this is going to be similar to some messages in the Communist Manifesto that we talked about at some point. Um, so they're the true producers of wealth, and the hated, I love this, reviled the blood-sucking plutocrat. Remember, a plutocrat is someone who is in power because they are wealthy. So the populists accused big business of corrupting democracy. Again, that's because the money had too much of an influence, and claimed businessmen had little concern for the average American except as raw material served up for the twin gods of production and profit. Yes, and these ideas do eventually lead to communism. Um, and of course, it does a little bit spread in the United States, but we'll talk about that much, much later. So, what is it the populists demanded? And if you look at these things, it's hard to say which ones are just ridiculous. Support labor unions, we have that. 8-hour workday, we have that. Graduated income tax. Now, this is a little more complicated. There's still a lot of debate on the income tax. Is it too high? Is it too low? So we're not really sure if that's a demand that's been met. Secret ballot, obviously. Women's right to vote, obviously. 8-hour work. Oh, there's twice. Oops, sorry guys. Direct election of U.S. senators initiative. Well, at least we have this in California, certainly, as well as many other states. And then finally, government regulation. This is the exact opposite of the laissez-faire approach. All right, thanks for listening.